on the geography of vaccine politics, or on how geography is bound up with the contested ethos of vaccination. In this talk, I want to share with you some wonderfully articulated insights by Eula Bliss from her book, her 2019 edition on immunity and inoculation. But more than this, I want to consider how a geographical approach to the body and to citizenship come into play when thinking about vaccination. Eula Bliss. If we imagine the action of a vaccine not just in terms of how it affects a single body, but also in terms of how it affects the collective body of a community, it is fair to think of vaccination as a kind of banking of immunity. Contributions to this bank are donations to those who cannot or will not be protected by their own immunity. This is the principle of herd immunity. And it is through herd immunity that mass vaccination becomes far more effective than individual vaccination. Any given vaccine can fail to produce immunity in an individual, and some vaccines, like the influenza vaccine, are less effective than others. But when enough people are vaccinated with even a relatively ineffective vaccine, viruses have trouble moving from host to host and cease to spread, sparing both the unvaccinated and those to whom vaccination has not produced immunity. This is why the chances of contracting measles can be higher for a vaccinated person living in a largely unvaccinated community than they are for an unvaccinated person living in a large vaccinated community. Here, the geography of the body is central. What is our body? What are its boundaries? If we think only of the body as an individual entity, coexisting but separate from other individual entities, then we miss that the body is both an individual autonomous entity and a socially connected and collective entity. There is our body, the body of our household, the body of our street, the body of our neighbourhood, the body of our village, town or city, the body of our residing country, and the body of our planet. Citizenship is a term that denotes the rights and responsibilities of individuals to their political community, usually the nation state. The idea of global citizenship is about the rights and responsibilities of us as individual human beings to collective humanity and planet Earth. Geographical scale and boundaries in relation to the body and citizenship are central to how we think about vaccination. Eula Bliss. Herd immunity seems implausible only if we think of our bodies as inherently disconnected from other bodies, which of course we do. The very expression herd immunity suggests that we are cattle waiting perhaps to be sent to slaughter, and it invites an unfortunate association with the term herd mentality, a stampede toward stupidity. The herd, we assume, is foolish. Those of us wishing to eschew, reject the herd mentality tend to prefer a frontier mentality in which we imagine our bodies as isolated homesteads that we tend either well or badly. The health of the homestead next to ours does not affect us. This thinking suggests, so long as ours is well tended. If we were to exchange the metaphor of the herd for a hive, perhaps the concept of shared immunity might be more appealing. Honeybees are matriarchal, environmental do-gooders who also happen to be entirely interdependent. The health of any individual bee, as we know from the recent epidemic of colony collapse, depends on the health of the hive. The cooperative work of bees, the journalist James Surowiecki suggests, is an example of the kind of collective problem solving our own society depends on. Here, the politics of vaccination is a politics of the hive, a communal effort of individual bodies to solving the problem of a disease harming our collective body. A sense of citizenship that extends beyond traditional geographical boundaries is necessary in the recognition that we are all connected. When an epidemic or pandemic happens, when the world confronts the reality of climate catastrophe, do we retreat to our individual homesteads, tendering our own backyard and our own individual frontier? Or do we recognise that our individual body is innately interdependent on our neighbours at all scales, from local through to global? Do we enact a global citizenship to save ourselves and others and the world? Eula Bliss. Believing that vaccination causes devastating diseases allows us to tell ourselves a story we already know. What heals may harm, and the sum of science is not always progress. Women know very well that knowledge from the natural sciences has been used in the interest of our domination and not our liberation, Donna Haraway writes. And this understanding, she observes, can render us less vulnerable to the seductive claims of absolute truth that are sometimes made in the name of science. But it can also invite us to undervalue the place and importance of scientific knowledge. We need science, Haraway warns. Where it's not built on social domination, science can be liberating. Herd immunity is not herd mentality. It is not an evacuation of our critical faculties. Healthy scepticism and independent research leading to informed decisions is not the same as subscribing to fake news and conspiracy theories. The history of science tells us that it can be wielded against certain groups. But the history of science is also one of progress and liberation. Polio cases in the world have decreased by over 99.9% since 1988 due to a global effort at vaccination. It is a good thing that global humanity is now largely free from the polio virus and that you as individuals are thus not at risk from polio. Eula Bliss, again, and for reference, when she talks about capital here, she's referring to an idea of capital as profit seeking out more profit in an endless spiral. Dracula, published shortly after the third and final volume of Marx's Capital, is fairly easily subjected to Marxist interpretation. Like Capital, profit seeking more profit, Dracula is impelled towards a continuous growth, the literary critic Franco Moretti writes. An unlimited expansion of his domain. Accumulation is inherent in his nature. What makes Dracula terrifying, Moretti argues, is not that he likes blood or enjoys blood, but that he needs blood. The drive toward capital, profit, making more profit, as Dracula suggests, is inherently inhumane. We are justified in feeling threatened by the unlimited expansion of industry, and we are justified in fearing that our own interests are secondary to corporate interests, to the needs of profit making. But refusal of vaccination undermines a system that is not actually typical of capitalism. It is a system in which both the burdens and the benefits are shared across the entire population. Vaccination allows us to use the products of capitalism for purposes that are counter to the pressures of capital. What Bliss is arguing here is that while some may fear global capitalism or globalisation and regard this as the source of all ills and all exploitations, the research and production of vaccinations is actually an area of capitalism that is potentially beneficial for all. Of course, as we know from the COVID pandemic, whilst we have a vaccination that can be shared across the entire global body, capitalism has got in the way of sharing vaccination to the world's economically poorer bodies, thus defeating its full potential. On the one hand, refusal of vaccination is not a radical political act. On the other hand, agitating for global distribution of vaccination at the point of need, not economic ability and status, is a radical political act. In my other talk, The Geographical Fate of Pandemics, available on YouTube, I illustrate how the relentless pursuit of profit by globalising capital, specifically global agribusiness, has escalated pandemic threat. The story of COVID is one that can very easily be told and explained through this lens. But as Karl Marx reminds us, global capitalism is contradictory, throwing up limitations and ills as well as potentialities and social goods. If globalisation delivered COVID to our individual bodies, so too did globalisation deliver the fastest turnaround of effective vaccination against a newly emergent disease. The future of human progress lies in a geographical sense of the body and citizenship that transcends both us as individuals and the nation state. In other words, when we confront a near future of rising pandemic threat and climate catastrophe, retreating to our individual homesteads and frontiers is not the answer. A politics of the hive is cooperative work at all scales, from local through to global, in addressing and solving the problems threatening the survival of humanity and planet Earth. One final quote from Eula Bliss. The natural body meets the body politique in the act of vaccination. Perhaps then, the politics of vaccination serves as a metaphor for the kind of body politics of global citizenship and humanity we more generally need. Okay, thank you very much for listening.